Clara Whitmore did not cry when Ethan Callahan looked her in the eyes and said those words. She had learned long ago that tears were something men like him used as proof that women like her couldn't handle the truth. So she stood there on that sun-baked platform in Red Willow, Montana, her one worn suitcase sitting in the dirt beside her feet, the summer heat pressing down on her shoulders like a hand trying to push her back onto that train, and she looked straight at the man who had sent for her. And she did not flinch. She just waited, and that more than anything else was what he had not expected. If you've ever been told that you were too much and not enough at the exact same time, if you've ever walked into a room and felt every eye in that room deciding your worth before you even opened your mouth, then you already know what Clara felt on that platform in the summer of 1885. And if this is the kind of story that calls to something deep inside you, I want you to subscribe to this channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Every comment means the world to me, and I promise you this story is going to go places you are not expecting. Now let's go back to that platform, because what happened next changed everything. The train from St. Louis had taken 4 days. Clara had spent most of those 4 days sitting with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, watching the country change outside the window, the flat green of Missouri giving way to the wide dry gold of the plains, the sky getting bigger and emptier until it felt less like sky and more like something that had swallowed the world. She had eaten very little. She had slept in short, restless stretches. She had read Ethan Callahan's letter so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. She knew every word of it by memory. I am a rancher in Red Willow, Montana. I have 3 children who need a mother. I am not a man of many words, but I am a man of my word. I need a woman who is not afraid of hard work and who can make a house into a home again. I will provide shelter, food, and honest treatment. I am looking for a partner, not a romance. That last line had been the one that decided her. I am looking for a partner, not a romance. Because Clara Whitmore had learned at a very early age that romance was not something the world had intended for her. She was 27 years old, and she had never once been looked at the way the novels described. She had been looked at plenty of other ways. She knew the look that said too big. She knew the look that said too plain. She knew the particular cruelty of the look that started at her feet and traveled slowly upward and arrived at her face with an expression that wasn't quite disgust and wasn't quite pity, but sat somewhere between the two, a kind of dismissal that didn't even bother pretending to be kind. She had lived with that look her whole life. So when Ethan Callahan's letter had arrived at the rooming house in St. Louis, where she worked as a cook and laundress for $6 a week, and that letter had said partner instead of wife and honest treatment instead of love. She had folded it carefully, placed it in the pocket of her apron, and finished the dishes before she let herself think about what it might mean. It meant a chance. Not a fairy tale. Not a rescue. Just a chance. And Clara Whitmore had never needed more than that. She had written back the same evening. She had described herself honestly because she was not a woman who believed in starting anything with a lie. She was 27. She had worked in households since she was 14. She could cook, clean, sew, manage accounts, and handle livestock. She was not a small woman. She used exactly those words, not a small woman, and she was not what most men pictured when they pictured a wife. But she was capable, she was steady, and she did not frighten easily. Ethan Callahan had written back in 10 days. Come on the 15th. I'll meet you at the station. That was the entire letter. She had taken it as a good sign. A man of few words, like he said. She packed her suitcase, 1 change of clothes, her mother's Bible, a small tin of dried herbs she used in cooking, and the letter, and she bought her ticket, and she climbed onto that train, and she did not look back at St. Louis, because there was nothing in St. Louis left to look back for. She arrived in Red Willow on a Thursday afternoon in July, when the heat came off the ground in waves and the whole town seemed to be holding its breath in the shade. The platform was not crowded, but the people who were there saw her the moment she stepped down. She felt it, that particular shift in the air that happened when a group of people looked at the same thing at the same time and arrived at the same silent verdict. She heard the murmur start before she had even picked up her suitcase. She didn't look around to find the faces. She had learned a long time ago that looking for the source of a murmur only gave it power. She stood straight. She picked up her suitcase. She looked for the man from the letter. She found him easily enough. Ethan Callahan was standing at the edge of the platform with his hat pushed back on his head and his arms crossed over his chest, and an expression on his face that she had also seen before. Not disgust, not pity, but something colder than either. Something that looked like a door being quietly closed. He was a tall man, lean in the way that men who work outdoors in the sun get lean, all of it functional, nothing wasted. He had dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been set hard for a long time and had forgotten how to soften. He was maybe 35, 36. He looked older than that. He looked at her the way people looked at a delivery that had arrived wrong. Clara walked toward him because there was no other direction to walk. She stopped a few feet away. She put down her suitcase. She looked him in the eyes because that was the other thing she had learned. You did not look away first. Looking away first told them everything they needed to know. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "I'm Clara Whitmore." He didn't take his hat off. He didn't extend his hand. He looked at her for a long moment with that closed-door expression, and then he said in a voice that was quiet and flat and absolutely certain of itself, "You're not my mail-order bride." The words landed the way those words were meant to land. She felt them. She would have been a liar if she said she didn't. But she kept her face still and her eyes level, and she said, "I beg your pardon. I said you're not my mail-order bride." He said it again without any particular cruelty, which was almost worse. Like he was correcting a simple factual error. Like this was a situation that had a straightforward solution, and the solution was obvious to everyone except her. "There's been some mistake. I'll get you a return ticket." Behind her, she could hear the murmuring more distinctly now. She caught a few words. "Heavens. And look at her." And a woman's voice, low and amused, saying something she couldn't quite make out, but whose tone she understood perfectly. Clara took a breath. "There hasn't been a mistake," she said. "I answered your advertisement. You wrote back and told me to come. I came. I am Clara Whitmore, and I believe I am exactly who you sent for." Something shifted in his expression. Not softening, not even close to softening, but a flicker of something that might have been acknowledgement. "I expected someone—" He stopped. "Smaller," Clara said. The words sat between them. Ethan Callahan looked away first. He looked out over the platform, and then he looked back at her and he said, "I got 3 children. I got a ranch that's barely staying above water. I don't have time for I need someone who can—" He stopped again. He seemed like a man who was accustomed to his words doing exactly what he wanted them to do, and was currently discovering that they weren't cooperating. "Someone who can work," Clara said. "That's what your letter said. I can work. I have been working since I was 14 years old, and I have never once been let go for anything other than leaving of my own choice." She paused. "You asked for a partner. I am offering to be one. What I look like has nothing to do with what I can do." The murmuring behind her had gone quieter. She didn't know if that was because people were losing interest or because they were listening more carefully. She didn't particularly care which. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was still hard. His eyes were still that particular shade of carefully controlled distance. But he hadn't walked away, and she had learned to read the small things. "I'll take you out to the ranch," he said finally. "You can see it. We'll talk." "Thank you," Clara said. She picked up her suitcase before he could offer to carry it because she did not want to start this. Whatever this was going to be with him doing her a favor she hadn't asked for. He led her to a buckboard wagon at the edge of the street. There was a horse tied to the post, a big dark bay with patient eyes. Clara climbed up without assistance. She felt him watching her as she did it, waiting for the moment when she would struggle, when she would need help, when she would give him the evidence he was already looking for. She didn't give it to him. They rode in silence out of town. The road was rough, and the afternoon sun was relentless, And the land on either side was beautiful in the way that land that doesn't care about you is always beautiful, vast and golden and indifferent. Clara kept her hands folded in her lap and watched the country and did not try to fill the silence with words she didn't have yet. After about 20 minutes, Ethan spoke without looking at her. "My wife died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Clara said. "Her name was Margaret." A pause. "The children, Thomas is 12. Emily is 9. Jacob is 5. "Your letter mentioned 3 children," Clara said. "I know what my letter said." Another silence. A longer one. The wagon bounced over a rut in the road, and Clara braced herself with one hand on the seat without making a sound about it. I want to be straight with you," Ethan said. He still wasn't looking at her. "I need someone to help with the household and the children. That's all I can offer. I'm not in a position to offer more than that." "Your letter said the same thing," Clara said. "I accepted those terms before I bought my ticket." He finally looked at her then. Just for a moment, just a quick sideways glance. She couldn't tell what he was looking for in her face. She couldn't tell if he found it. "You're not what I expected," he said. "No," she agreed. "I imagine I'm not." The Callahan Ranch appeared around a bend in the road, and Clara looked at it with the steady eyes of a woman who had spent her life walking into situations that were harder than they first appeared, and figuring out what needed doing. What needed doing here was considerable. The house was a good-sized structure, solidly built, but wearing the particular look of a place that had been maintained by willpower alone for too long and had recently run out of willpower. The fence line along the yard was missing several boards. The vegetable beds near the house had gone mostly to weeds. The front steps had a board that was splitting down the middle. The curtains in the front window were the kind of faded that came from years of sun with nobody noticing to replace them. It was not a hopeless place. It was an exhausted place. There was a difference, and Clara had always been able to see it. Ethan stopped the wagon in front of the house. Before he had even set the brake, the front door opened, and 3 children came out, and then stopped on the porch as if the sight of Clara had frozen them in place. The oldest boy, Thomas, was tall for 12, with his father's jaw and his father's careful measuring eyes. He stood with his arms crossed, a posture he had clearly learned from the man beside her, and looked at Clara with an expression that said quite plainly, "I have been disappointed before, and I expect to be disappointed again." Emily stood just behind her brother, smaller with her mother's coloring, by the look of it. Lighter hair, lighter eyes, and a quietness about her that wasn't shyness exactly, but something that had once been more open and had learned to be careful. She was watching Clara the way a person watched something they wanted to trust and weren't sure if they should. And then there was Jacob. Jacob was 5 years old and had clearly not yet learned to be careful about anything. He stood at the very edge of the porch with his shoes untied and a smear of something on his chin and his eyes wide open, and he looked at Clara with the completely unguarded curiosity of a child who hadn't been told yet what he was supposed to think. "Who's that?" he demanded. "Jacob." Ethan said the single word carrying a clear instruction that Jacob appeared to entirely ignore. "Is she the new lady?" Jacob pressed. "Papa said a new lady was coming. Are you the new lady?" "Jacob, that's enough." "My name is Clara," Clara said, looking directly at Jacob, who immediately brightened, as if she had said something delightful. "I've come to stay for a while, if your father will have me." "Papa, can she stay?" Jacob turned to his father with the absolute confidence of a child who believed his requests were generally granted. "She said she wants to stay." "We're still talking about that," Ethan said. Thomas had not moved. He was still watching Clara with those measuring eyes. "Where are you from?" he asked. It wasn't unfriendly. It was the question of someone gathering information. "St. Louis," Clara said. "Before that, Ohio. You got family there?" "No," she said. Thomas absorbed this. "So you got nowhere to go back to?" It wasn't quite a question. Clara looked at him steadily. "I've never needed somewhere to go back to," she said. "I've always moved forward." Something crossed his face. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it wasn't the closed door she'd seen on his father's face either. It was more like the door had been looked at, considered. Emily had not spoken. She was still watching from behind her brother, her expression unreadable. Clara met her eyes for just a moment and smiled a real smile. Not the bright, determined smile she had been using for strangers her whole life, but a quieter one, and then she looked away, giving the girl the space to decide. Ethan climbed down from the wagon. "Clara," he said, and paused, and she had the sense that he was deciding something. "Come inside. I'll show you the house." She climbed down with her suitcase and followed him to the door. The inside of the house was what the outside had promised: solid bones, good construction, and the layer of accumulated weariness that settled over a place when the people living in it were doing the best they could, and the best they could was not quite enough. The kitchen was the largest room on the ground floor. There was a wood stove that was good quality, but needed blacking, a large table with 6 chairs, a shelf of supplies that was organized in the way things got organized by someone who had been trying to maintain a system alone and was losing the battle. There was a smell in the kitchen that Clara recognized. Not a bad smell, just the smell of cooking done by someone who was feeding people rather than nourishing them. There was a difference. Ethan showed her through the rooms without much comment. The children's bedrooms upstairs. His room, the door of which he pointed to and did not open. A small room at the end of the hall, barely large enough for a single bed and a washstand. "This would be your room," he said. He said it neutrally, like he was describing a feature of the land, rather than offering her something. "It's fine," Clara said. Because it was. She had slept in smaller. They went back downstairs. Jacob had followed them through the entire tour, at a distance of approximately 3 feet, narrating occasionally in a low voice that he seemed to believe was quieter than it was. Thomas had gone outside. Emily had disappeared into the kitchen, and Clara could hear faintly the sound of her doing something at the work table. In the main room, Ethan turned to face her. He had his hat in his hands, now turning it slowly. It seemed to be something he did when he was thinking through something difficult. "I'll be straight with you," he said. "You said that already," Clara said. "And I believe you, so be straight." His mouth pressed together briefly. "I didn't expect you to be. I expected someone different. And I don't have the time or the money to send you back and wait on someone else. And I can see you need—" He stopped. "I don't mean that as an insult." "I know," she said. Because she did. She recognized the particular discomfort of a man trying to say a difficult thing without being unkind about it, and whatever else Ethan Callahan was, she didn't think he was a cruel man. Closed, yes. Exhausted, certainly. Frightened of something he wouldn't name, probably. But not cruel. "I can offer you room and board," he said. "And I can offer fair treatment. If things—" He hesitated. "If things work out, we can talk about the rest of it. The formal arrangement." "Marriage," she said. "Yes," he said. "So for now, I'm your housekeeper." He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I suppose that's one way to—" "It's fine," Clara said again, and she meant it again, and something in her tone must have communicated that she meant it because the slight tension in his shoulders. Tension she had noticed even before he was aware she was noticing things, released just slightly. "I came to work. Let me work. We can figure the rest of it out as we go." He nodded. He put his hat back on. He seemed to find it easier to look at her when the transaction had been made simple and practical. "Supper needs to be on by 6, he said. "The men eat after the family." "How many men?" 4, sometimes 5 during busy seasons. "Any dietary needs I should know about?" He blinked. It was the first time she'd seen him blink with any expression in it. "I know. Nobody's ever asked me that." "I'm asking," she said. "No," he said. "Nothing special." "All right." She looked around the kitchen. "I'll have supper on by 6. He went out. Clara stood alone in the kitchen for exactly 30 seconds, which was the amount of time she allowed herself for moments like this, the moment between walking into a new situation and beginning to work. She used those 30 seconds to look around properly and understand what she was dealing with. Then she put down her suitcase, rolled up her sleeves, and started. Emily appeared in this kitchen doorway about 20 minutes later. She stood there for a while without speaking. Clara was working on the stove, getting the feel of it. Every stove had its own character. The places that ran hot, the places that needed more wood, the particular language of its drafts and draws. "I usually help with supper," Emily said finally. "I'd be glad of the help," Clara said without turning around. "Do you know where your father keeps the salt pork?" A pause. Then Emily came into the kitchen. They worked side by side for a while without talking. Clara asked questions about where things were kept, and Emily answered them, and that was the extent of it, but it was enough. Clara had learned a long time ago that working beside someone was its own kind of conversation. You could learn more about a person from the way they moved in a kitchen than from an hour of talking. What she learned about Emily in that first half hour was this: she was precise. She was careful. She had been doing this for longer than a 9-year-old should have been doing it. And there was a way she watched Clara's hands while they worked, not suspiciously, but hungrily, the way someone watched a person doing something they wanted to learn. "Your mother taught you to cook?" Clara asked at one point. Emily's hands stilled for just a moment. Then they started moving again. "Some," she said, "before she got sick." "She taught you well," Clara said. Emily didn't answer, but her hands kept moving. Jacob wandered in and out of the kitchen approximately 6 times in the next hour, each time with a different question. "What is that smell? Can I have some? Is that going to be supper? Why does it smell like that? Can I help? Am I helping?" Clara answered each question with the same patient attention she gave everything. "Yes, that's what cooking smells like when it's done right. You can have some at supper. Yes, that's supper. Because good food smells like good food. Yes, you're helping. You're very helpful." By the time Ethan came in from the barn with Thomas behind him, the kitchen was warm and the table was set and the food was on, and the whole house had a smell to it that Clara recognized, but couldn't quite have named something between inhabited and alive, the smell of a place that was being taken care of. Thomas stopped in the doorway and looked at the table, and then at Clara, and then at his father. Ethan stopped too. He looked at the spread on the table: biscuits, salt pork with gravy, stewed vegetables, a dried apple cake that Clara had found the ingredients for in the back of the pantry shelf, and something moved across his face so quickly she almost didn't catch it. She caught it. She had learned to catch the small things. She turned back to the stove before he saw her see it. "Supper's ready," she said. "Sit down while it's hot." They sat down. Jacob immediately reached for a biscuit, and Thomas immediately told him to wait, and Emily immediately said that Thomas didn't have to be so sharp about it, and Ethan said enough in that single quiet word that apparently carried the authority of God in this household, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of 4 people settling into their chairs, and the good ordinary noise of supper being served. Clara stood at the counter and began filling plates. "You're not eating?" Ethan asked. She turned. He was looking at her with that same measuring expression, but there was something slightly different in it now. Less closed, maybe. Or maybe she was reading into things. "I'll eat after," she said. "The men?" "You'll eat at the table," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him for a moment. Then she got herself a plate and sat down. Jacob immediately started talking to her about something involving a dog he had seen near the creek that morning, and Emily began cutting her pork with the focused attention of a person who was pretending not to be listening to something, and Thomas kept his eyes on his own plate, but did not put on the display of deliberate disinterest he'd worn on the porch. Ethan said very little. He ate with the efficient purpose of a man who treated meals as fuel rather than pleasure. But at one point he picked up a biscuit and looked at it in a way that Clara noticed, and she thought about the particular expression of someone encountering something they hadn't expected to enjoy. After supper, while Clara was washing up, she heard voices in the main room, Thomas asking his father something in a low voice, and Ethan answering, and then Thomas again, and she couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the tone of it, the way Thomas's voice carried a question that wasn't just about the words of the question. Then Jacob appeared at the kitchen door again. This time with his shoes finally tied, someone had done it for him, and his face carrying the broadcast satisfaction of a child who has recently eaten well. "That was good," he announced. "I'm glad you liked it," Clara said. "Better than Papa's," he said. "Papa makes beans every night, just beans, and sometimes biscuits, but they're not as good. Jacob." Thomas appeared behind him, and the single word had the same quiet authority his father's voice carried when it said enough, which told Clara something about Thomas too. "Go get ready for bed." "I'm telling her about the beans." "I heard about the beans," Clara said. "Go get ready for bed, Jacob. I'll come say good night." Jacob looked at her as if she had just offered him something extraordinary. Then he ran down the hall. Thomas stood in the doorway for a moment after his brother left. Clara kept washing up. She could feel him deciding something. "It was good," he said finally. "The supper." "Thank you," she said. "I'm not saying that to be, it was just good, that's all." "I know," she said. "That's all I took it as." Another pause. Then he went away too, and Clara finished the washing up alone, and the kitchen was clean and quiet, and outside the window the Montana sky had gone the deep blue of evening, and the first stars were starting. She dried her hands. She went upstairs and found Jacob in his bed, with his eyes already half closed, and said good night to him, and he murmured something that might have been good night, or might have been something else entirely, and she pulled his blanket up and left him. Emily's door was closed. Clara didn't knock. She went back downstairs. Ethan was in the main room sitting in a chair by the cold fireplace with a ledger book open on his knee, but he wasn't writing in it. He was staring at the empty grate. He looked up when she appeared. "I wanted to let you know I'll be starting early tomorrow," Clara said. "There are some things in the kitchen that could use attention, and I noticed the vegetable beds near the house. If you don't object, I'd like to start on those as well." He looked at her for a moment. "Whatever you need," he said. "I'll try not to be in the way," she said. "You weren't in the way today," he said. The words seemed to cost him something, like they were being extracted against his will. Clara nodded. "Good night, Mr. Callahan." "Ethan," he said. And then, as if he wasn't sure why he'd said it, "If you're going to live here, you might as well call me Ethan." "Good night, Ethan," she said. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the small bed in the small room at the end of the hall, and she looked at her hands in the dark, and she thought about the words he had said to her on that platform. "You're not my mail-order bride." She thought about the way he had said them, not with malice, with a kind of blunt, automatic certainty, the certainty of a man who had learned to see the world in categories and put things into them quickly, because a man with 3 children and a failing ranch and 4 years of grief behind him did not have the time or the energy for things that didn't fit the categories. She thought about the look on his face when he'd seen that table set for supper. She thought about Jacob saying better than Papa's with absolute confidence and no cruelty whatsoever. She thought about Emily's hands in the kitchen moving carefully and quickly, and with a competence that no 9-year-old should have needed to develop. She thought about Thomas in the doorway saying it was good, like the words were something he had decided to give her, even though he hadn't quite made up his mind yet about what they meant. She had walked into this house as nobody, as the woman he hadn't wanted, as the mistake that had arrived on the afternoon train. She knew exactly what she was doing here, and it wasn't what Ethan Callahan thought it was. It wasn't about proving she deserved to stay. It was about the children who were getting up every morning in a house where nobody was making it a home, and the man who was working himself into the ground to hold something together that was coming apart at every seam, and the particular kind of damage that got done to people when they were left too long with their grief and no one came. She had spent her whole life being told she was too much, too large, too plain, too determined, too willing to walk into rooms where she wasn't wanted and refused to leave until she had done what needed doing. She looked at her hands in the dark of that small room. She was going to do what needed doing here too. She lay down on top of the blankets without undressing, because the night was warm, and she was tired in the good way, the way she got tired when she had worked hard at something that mattered, and she was asleep within minutes. She did not dream. Tomorrow was already waiting, and Clara Whitmore had never needed much of a preamble. Outside, the Montana sky went full dark, and the stars came out all at once, the way they did out here, thick and bright and absolutely indifferent to the small dramas of the people sleeping below them. In the main room downstairs, Ethan Callahan sat for a long time with his ledger book unopened and his eyes on the empty grate and his hat on his knee. He was thinking about supper. He was thinking about biscuits and the way they had tasted, actually tasted, not just been food, and the way the kitchen had smelled when he walked in, and the way Jacob had climbed into his chair with his shoes tied and his face bright, and the way Emily had set a plate in front of him without being asked, like she had been waiting for someone to show her it was worth doing again. He was thinking about a woman who had stood on a platform with one worn suitcase and looked him straight in the eyes when he said the worst thing he had said to anyone in a long time, and had not cried, and had not argued, and had not begged. She had just waited. He closed the ledger book. He set it on the side table. He sat for another moment in the quiet. Then he got up and went to bed, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not lie awake until midnight. He didn't know yet what that meant. But the house was different tonight. He didn't know yet what that meant either. She was 3 days into the work before she understood the shape of the problem, not the surface of it. She had understood the surface the first morning when she had gone through the kitchen properly and found that the supply ledger hadn't been updated in 4 months, and that half the preserved goods on the back shelf had gone bad without anyone noticing. Not the edges of it. She had seen the edges that first evening in Emily's too careful hands, and Thomas's too old eyes, and the way Jacob had looked at a properly set table like it was something unusual. She had understood the surface and the edges immediately, because Clara Whitmore had spent 13 years working in other people's households, and she could read a house the way some people read a book. But the shape of the problem, the full shape, the one that told you how deep the roots went, that took 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, she went to Ethan before he left for the barn. He was at the kitchen table with his coffee, which he drank black and quickly, like it was a task to be completed, rather than a pleasure to be taken. He looked up when she came in. "I need to talk to you about the supply ledger," she said. He set down his coffee. "What about it?" "It hasn't been updated since March. There are goods on the back shelf that spoiled in April and nobody caught it. You're also short on flour salt pork and dried beans, the kind of short that means someone is going to the general store more than twice a week and paying retail prices for things that should be bought in bulk." He was quiet for a moment. "Margaret handled the household accounts." "I know," Clara said. She said it simply, without softness and without hardness, because it wasn't a wound she was touching, it was a fact she was acknowledging. "I'd like to take them over if you're willing. I'd also like to know what your current arrangement is with the general store, whether you have credit, and if so, what the terms are." Ethan looked at her over his coffee cup. "You know accounting. I worked for a merchant family in St. Louis for 4 years, she said. Mr. Hargrove handled dry goods imports. I kept his household accounts and sometimes his business accounts when his bookkeeper was sick." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, he was a man who kept his expressions close, but an adjustment, a small recalibration of whatever he had decided about her. "The store credit is through Henderson's," he said. "Terms are 30 days. We're currently—" He stopped. He looked at his coffee. "Over terms?" Clara asked. 6 weeks, he said. "All right," she said. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like a man who has been doing 6 jobs at once for 3 years, and one of them fell behind," she said. "I'm not here to make you feel bad about it, Ethan. I'm here to fix it." He looked at her then, really looked, the way he hadn't quite managed to do since the platform. "What are you going to fix it with?" he said. "Tell me what you have," she said. "Not just money, everything, livestock, crops, assets, all of it. Then we'll figure out what we have to work with." He told her. It took the better part of an hour and several more cups of coffee, and by the end of it, Clara had a clear and unsparing picture of exactly where the Callahan ranch stood, which was upright, but not by much, and leaning. She thanked him, took her notes, and went back to work. What she did not tell him, not yet, because it was not yet the time, was what she had also begun to notice in those first 3 days. The small things that didn't add up right. The fence line on the east pasture that had been cut, not broken, cut clean, at a height that said tools, not weather. The 2 calves that had wandered off in the night and been found 2 miles south with no explanation for how they'd gotten through a fence that had been intact the day before. The way one of the ranch hands, a man named Cutler, who had a habit of appearing just at the edge of conversations and then drifting away. When you looked at him directly, had been in town 3 afternoons running in the same week. She noted these things in the way she noted everything quietly, without reaching a conclusion, until she had enough facts to support one. She had learned that from the merchant in St. Louis, who had a saying she had always liked: a woman who decides before she looks is just guessing with more confidence. She was not guessing yet, but she was looking very carefully. The first real confrontation came on a Thursday 10 days after her arrival, and it came from a direction she had expected, even if she hadn't known exactly when. She was at Henderson's general store in town, working through the bulk orders she had calculated would bring the household supply costs down by almost a third over 2 months. She had the list in her hand, and she was at the counter talking terms with Mr. Henderson, who was a cautious man, but a fair one, when the bell above the door rang, and Victoria Hayes came in. Clara had heard about Victoria Hayes within her first 2 days at the ranch, because in a small town like Red Willow, a woman like Victoria Hayes was the kind of information that arrived without being sought. She was a widow, which everyone said first. Wealthy, which everyone said second. Influential, which was what people meant when they said the first 2 things. She had owned the largest ranch in the valley jointly with her husband for 20 years, and when her husband died 2 years ago, he had left her not just the ranch, but the social position, and she had maintained both with the focused energy of a woman who understood that position required maintenance. She was somewhere around 50, Clara guessed. She was not a small woman either, though she was the kind of woman whose size read as presence rather than problem, which Clara had long since understood was a matter of money and posture, and how many people in a room believed you belonged there. She was dressed well. Her hair was done. She looked at Clara, and then she looked at Clara again, the second look slower and more deliberate, and Clara recognized that look too. "You must be Ethan Callahan's housekeeper," Victoria said. She had a voice that sounded like honey, but had a particular quality of honey that has started to ferment. "Clara Whitmore," Clara said, and extended her hand. Victoria looked at the hand. She shook it briefly. "I've heard so much about you," Victoria said with a smile that said she had heard things and had found them entertaining. "The whole town has been talking. I imagine they have," Clara said, and turned back to Mr. Henderson. She felt Victoria move closer. Not aggressively subtly, the way women who were skilled at this sort of thing moved close enough to make a point without providing anything that could be called a provocation. "You know," Victoria said to the general air more than to Clara specifically. "I've known Ethan Callahan since before his wife died. He is a good man, a proud man." A pause. "He deserves the best, don't you think? The absolute best for those children." "I agree completely," Clara said without turning. "Mr. Henderson, if you can match that price on the salt pork, I'll commit to a monthly order through the fall." Henderson looked between the 2 women and arrived at the wise decision to look at neither of them and focus on his ledger. "I think I can manage that, Miss Whitmore." "Wonderful." She closed her own ledger. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I'll be in Friday to collect the first order." She turned to go. Victoria was between her and the door, which was either accidental or deliberate, and Clara had a very good sense of which. "It must be difficult," Victoria said pleasantly, "coming all this way only to find things so different from what you expected." Clara stopped. She looked at Victoria directly. "I didn't expect anything in particular," she said. "I came to work. The work is exactly what I expected." Victoria's smile didn't waver. "Of course. I only mean it's a hard situation for a woman who isn't accustomed to ranch life. And Ethan's children have been through so much. It would be terrible if they got attached to someone who, another pause delicate as a blade, wasn't going to stay. That's a concern I understand, Clara said, which is why I intend to stay. She met Victoria's eyes. Good afternoon, Mrs. Hayes. She walked past her and out the door. She was halfway down the street before she let herself take a full breath. She was not shaking. She didn't shake. But she felt the confrontation, the way she felt all of them in a deep place that had learned to be very quiet about what things cost. She went home and made supper and did not say anything about Victoria Hayes to Ethan. But she thought about what Victoria had said got attached to someone who wasn't going to stay, and she thought about it for a long time. Not because it frightened her, because it told her something. Victoria Hayes was not just being territorial about Ethan Callahan. She was doing what certain people did when they believed the outcome had already been decided in their favor and were simply waiting for the inconvenient variable to remove itself. She was assuming Clara would leave. That assumption was going to be expensive. The children were the reason she stayed focused. Jacob had taken to following her around the house in the mornings with the faithful, uncomplicated devotion of a 5-year-old who had decided she was his person and saw no reason to be subtle about it. He talked constantly about the horses, about a rabbit he had seen near the creek, about a boy at church named Danny, who had a dog with 3 legs, about everything and nothing, with the particular intensity of a child who had been starved for a listener. Clara listened to all of it with equal attention because she had learned that children talked about what mattered most in the spaces between what seemed like it mattered most. And what she learned from listening to Jacob in those morning hours while she was working and he was trailing after her was that the children had not had a consistent meal until she arrived. That Thomas had been cooking supper 3 nights a week, and the other nights had been cold food or nothing special. That Emily had been doing the washing since she was 7 because someone had to. That Jacob had once waited for 4 hours on the porch for his father to come in and eat with him, not understanding why the man he loved most in the world had forgotten. Ethan hadn't forgotten. He had been working. He had been surviving. He had been doing the only thing he knew how to do when everything else had collapsed, which was to work harder. But surviving and living were not the same thing, and somewhere along the way, the Callahan household had stopped living and started just getting through. Clara thought about this while she repaired the split board on the front steps, which she did on a Tuesday afternoon with a hammer and nails from the barn, and Thomas watching her from the porch with an expression that started as skepticism and moved very slowly toward something else. "You know how to do that?" he asked. "My father was a carpenter," she said. "He died when I was 9, but I watched him enough to manage simple repairs." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Emily cried for a year after Mama died," he said. "She doesn't cry anymore." Clara kept working. "What about you?" "I didn't cry," he said. "Doesn't mean it didn't hurt," she said. He didn't answer that, but he didn't go inside either. He stayed on the porch while she finished the repair, and when she was done, and she tested the board with her weight, he said, "Look solid." "Your grandfather's nails," she said. "Found them in the back of the barn. Good steel." Thomas looked at the step. "Papa doesn't come in for supper until after dark sometimes," he said. "He used to eat with us, before." "Before your mother died?" Clara asked. "Yeah." He was quiet again. Then, "He doesn't know how to be sad around us, so he just stays outside." Clara sat down on the repaired step. She looked at Thomas for a moment. "Your father loves you," she said. "He's just lost track of how to show it. That happens to people who are carrying too much alone." Thomas looked at her. He was 12 years old, and he had the eyes of someone who had been deciding things too long without enough information. "Are you going to leave?" he asked, "like Mrs. Hayes says you will." Clara went very still. "What did Mrs. Hayes say?" she asked. "I heard her tell the ladies at the church social." He didn't look away. "She said a woman like you doesn't last. That you'll figure out what you got yourself into and go back where you came from." Clara looked at her hands. Then she looked at Thomas. "Has a single thing in this house gotten worse since I arrived?" she asked. He thought about it. Which she appreciated. He was a boy who thought before he answered, and she had learned to value that. "No," he said. "I don't leave things I've started," she said. "I never have. That's something you can decide to believe or not, but it's true." Something moved across his face. Slowly, like the sun coming out from behind a cloud that has been there a long time. "Okay," he said. It was not a declaration. It was a 12-year-old, not a promise. It was a 12-year-old boy giving something a chance, which is a very specific and not a small thing. Clara nodded and got up and went back inside. The twist arrived on a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks after she had come to the ranch, and it arrived in the form of a man she hadn't expected wearing a suit. She hadn't expected with a look on his face that she recognized from her time in St. Louis. The look of a man who was accustomed to walking into rooms and having what he wanted. His name was Walter Grayson. He arrived in a hired buggy, which in Red Willow was a statement all by itself, and he knocked on the front door of the Callahan Ranch with a politeness that was so precisely calibrated it felt like a threat. Clara answered the door because Ethan was out at the far pasture and not expected back for an hour. Grayson looked at her with an assessment that lasted less than a second, and then was neatly disguised as pleasantness. He was maybe 50, well-fed with silver hair, and the kind of soft hands that came from having other people do his difficult work. "Good afternoon," he said. "I'm Walter Grayson. I've come to speak with Mr. Callahan about a business matter." "He's not here," Clara said. "You're welcome to wait." She showed him into the main room. She brought him coffee, because that was what you did. And she did not stay in the room because sometimes leaving a room was the smartest thing you could do. She went to the kitchen where she could hear through the thin wall between rooms. She stood very still, and she listened. Grayson didn't know she was listening. That was a mistake people often made around Clara. They forgot she was there. They had been forgetting she was there her whole life, because a woman who looked like her in a world like this one had been trained to take up as little space as possible, and she had learned to use that invisibility the way other people use tools. He wasn't on the telephone. There was no telephone. But she could hear him moving, and once she heard what sounded like the creak of the roll-up desk in the corner of the main room, the one where Ethan kept his papers. She kept very still. Ethan came back 40 minutes later. Clara met him at the barn door. "There's a man named Grayson in the main room," she said before he had even dismounted. "He arrived 40 minutes ago. He went to your desk." Ethan went very still on the horse. "What?" "He went to your desk," she said again. "I heard him. I don't know what he was looking at. I couldn't see without him knowing I was there." The expression that moved across Ethan's face was not one she had seen on him before. It was harder than anything she had seen from him, and beneath the hardness, there was something that looked almost like fear, which told her that the name Grayson meant something to him, that it hadn't meant to her 20 minutes ago. He dismounted. He handed her the reins without a word. She took them. He went inside. She stood there holding his horse and listening to the silence of the house, and waited. Through the window she could hear the low murmur of voices. She couldn't make out the words this time. After about 15 minutes, she heard the front door open and close, and Grayson's buggy leaving. Ethan didn't come back out. Clara gave the horse to one of the hands and went inside. Ethan was standing at his desk. The roll-up was open. He was looking at something, a paper, or the absence of one, she couldn't tell. "Ethan," she said. He turned. His face was very controlled. "What did he want?" she asked. "He's been buying land in the valley," Ethan said. "Struggling ranches. He made an offer on this one. And I told him no." A pause. "He said to think it over, that the offer wouldn't be available forever." Another pause. "He's been making that offer to every ranch in a 20-mile radius that's had a bad season. How many have sold? 3 that I know of." He set down whatever he was holding. "He's not buying struggling land, Clara. He's got a plan for it. Something bigger. But I don't know enough about what he's doing to know how to stop it." Clara looked at him. She thought about what she knew. She thought about the cut fence line, the disappeared calves, Cutler going to town 3 afternoons in a row. "Has anything on this ranch gone wrong recently?" she asked. that you can't explain." He looked at her sharply. "The fence line east of the creek was cut last month." "I know," she said. "I saw it." "I thought it wasn't just anything," she said. "Someone cut that fence deliberately. And 2 of your calves that went missing in the night, they didn't wander through that fence by accident." Ethan was very still. "You've been watching," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment, something changed between them. Nothing you could have pointed at, nothing that had a name yet, but something that had been one thing and was now quietly something else. He was looking at her the way you looked at someone you had been wrong about in a way that mattered. "What else have you seen?" he said. She told him. All of it, the fence, the calves, Cutler's trips to town, the things she had noticed and noted without speaking. She laid it out in the same plain, practical language she used for everything, and she watched him receive it, and she watched him understand what it meant. When she finished, he sat down heavily in the chair behind the desk. "He's not just buying land," Ethan said. "He's making sure the land is cheap first." "That's what it looks like," she said. "He's destroying what we built," Ethan said, and his voice had gone quiet in a way that was worse than anger. "Piece by piece, so we can't fight back." "He's been doing it to all of them," Clara said. "Every ranch that sold. I'd bet my life they had the same problems before they gave up." Ethan looked at the desk. Then he looked at her. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" he asked. Not with anger, with something closer to wonder. "Because I didn't have enough yet to be sure," she said. "I don't speak before I'm sure." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do we do?" And Clara, who had spent 3 weeks in this house learning everything she could learn, who had spent 13 years before that learning how to read people and situations, and the space between what was said and what was true, sat down across from him at the desk and said, "We go talk to the other ranchers." He looked at her. "They won't listen to me alone. Half of them have already given up hope." "They won't be listening to you alone," Clara said. "They'll be listening to me too." The silence held for a second. "You think that helps?" he asked. "I think," she said, "that I am exactly the kind of woman that those men have been ignoring their whole lives. And I think that means I know things they don't think I know. And I think," she said, "that is going to matter before this is over." He looked at her. Outside, the sun was going down over the Montana Valley, and the ranch that had been on the edge of falling apart for 3 years was still standing. For now. But Clara had learned something else in those 3 weeks. Something she had not told Ethan yet, because the time for it hadn't come. She had found in the back of the kitchen ledger, behind 3 months of blank pages, a single sheet of paper in handwriting that wasn't Ethan's. Numbers, dates, names of ranches, and at the bottom, in the same hand, the initials that she had now seen twice on that paper, and on the outside of an envelope that Cutler had not known she'd seen him carry from the barn to town on the second of those 3 afternoon trips. W.G. Walter Grayson had been planning this longer than anyone knew, and he had someone on the inside of the Callahan Ranch helping him. Clara folded her hands on the desk. "We're going to need to move carefully," she said. Ethan nodded. He was already looking at her differently, not with the closed-door expression of the platform, not with the cautious wariness of those first days, but with the direct attention of a man who had just realized that the person sitting across from him was the most important person in the room. "Whatever you need," he said. And there it was again, the same words he had said to her in the kitchen on the first morning when he had meant them as a dismissal. He didn't mean them that way now. Clara looked at him across the desk. "I need you to trust me," she said. He held her gaze. "I think," he said slowly, "I already do." The morning after their conversation at the desk, Clara was up before dawn. She had slept 4 hours, which was enough. She had learned to work on 4 hours when 4 hours was what the situation allowed. And right now the situation was moving faster than she had anticipated, which meant she needed to think faster too. She had the kitchen ledger open on the table, and the sheet of paper she had found, the one with Grayson's initials, laid flat beside it. She had been staring at both of them since 5 in the morning, not because she hadn't already understood what they meant, but because she needed to understand what she could prove. Understanding something and proving it were two entirely different things. She heard Ethan's boots on the stairs at 5:15. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw her at the table with the papers spread out, and he stood in the doorway for a moment, the way a man stood when he had gone to sleep expecting one situation and had woken up to find it was already moving without him. "You didn't sleep," he said. "I slept enough," she said. "Sit down, I need to show you something." He sat. She slid the sheet of paper across the table to him. He looked at it. She watched his face as he read it, the numbers, the dates, the names, and the initials at the bottom, and she watched the exact moment when the full weight of it landed. "Where did you find this?" he said. "Back of the kitchen ledger," she said. "Behind the blank pages." "That's Margaret's handwriting." His voice had gone very quiet. "That's Clara, that's my wife's handwriting." She had suspected as much, but hearing him say, it was different from suspecting it. She stayed quiet and let him hold that. "She found something." He said more to himself than to her. "She found something, and she wrote it down, and she put it somewhere she thought—" He stopped. He pressed his hand flat on the paper. "She got sick 3 months after Grayson first came through the valley." Clara said, "I know." He looked up at her. His eyes were hard and dark, and something in them was burning in a way she hadn't seen before. "You think it's connected?" he said. "I think your wife was a smart woman," Clara said carefully, "and I think she found something that scared her, and I think she hid the evidence somewhere only someone running the household would look." She paused. "And I think Grayson has been operating in this valley for longer than anyone realized." Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Cutler." "Yes," Clara said. He pushed back from the table and stood up, and for a moment she thought he was going to walk out to the barn and confront the man directly, which would have been a disaster, and she stood up too. "Ethan," she said. He stopped. "If you go out there and tell him what you know, he'll be gone before noon, and Grayson will know we're on to him before supper time," she said. "We need Cutler where we can see him. We need him to keep doing exactly what he's been doing until we have everything." He turned. His jaw was that hard set again, the one she had come to recognize as the place where his anger and his discipline were fighting each other. "He's been feeding information to the man who might have—" He stopped himself. He looked at the ceiling for a second, then back at her. "How long?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I need you to act like you don't know. Can you do that?" He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "Because I need 3 more days." She had already planned the 3 days before she went to sleep. She laid it out for him now over coffee, what she needed to find where she thought she'd find it, and what it would take to build a case solid enough that the territorial court couldn't ignore it. She told him about the pattern she had identified across the 3 ranches that had already sold to Grayson, the same sequence of problems, always in the same order, always about 6 weeks apart. Cut fence first, then missing livestock, then supply interference, then a fire or a flood that couldn't quite be explained. She told him she had pieced this together from conversations at Henderson's store and at the church social, and from the things that Jacob had told her without knowing he was telling her, because Jacob talked to the other children, and the other children talked to Jacob, and nobody thought to be careful about what a 5-year-old heard. Ethan listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You've been doing this for 3 weeks." "I've been watching for 3 weeks," she said. "There's a difference. Most people wouldn't." He stopped. "Most people didn't come here the way I came," she said. "I had a lot to prove, and not many ways to prove it. I used the ones I had." He looked at her across the table in the early morning quiet of the kitchen, and for a moment it was very simple and very plain. A man and a woman sitting at a table with a problem between them and enough trust to work on it together. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to ride out to the Morrison Ranch today," she said, casually, Don't say why, just check in. See if they've had any of the same problems. Morrison barely speaks to anyone. He'll speak to you, she said. You knew him before all of this. Remind him of that. Ethan nodded slowly. And you? I'm going to go talk to the Parker family, she said. Martha Parker was at the church social. She looked at me like she wanted to say something and then didn't. I want to know what that something was. He looked at her. Clara. I'll be careful, she said. I wasn't going to say be careful, he said. I was going to say take the gray mare. She's faster than she looks. Clara looked at him for just a second longer than she needed to. Thank you, she said. She was at the Parker Ranch by 9 in the morning. Martha Parker was a small woman in her 60s with calloused hands and sharp eyes that had seen enough to make them permanently wary. She came to the door and saw Clara and did not look surprised, which Clara found significant. I wondered when you'd come, Martha said. May I come in? Clara asked. Martha stepped back from the door. The Parker kitchen was neat and worn, in the same way the Callahan kitchen had been when Clara first arrived, the neatness of a person who was managing, not thriving. They sat across from each other at the table, and Martha put out coffee without asking if Clara wanted any, which was another thing Clara found significant. How bad was it? Clara asked. Martha looked at her. Bad enough that Franklin almost signed Grayson's papers, she said. 2 nights before he was going to, the problem stopped, just stopped, like someone turned off a spigot. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Franklin thought he'd gotten lucky. I thought someone decided we weren't worth the trouble. Or someone decided you'd already been softened up enough, Clara said. Martha was quiet. You know what he's doing. I'm building what I know, Clara said. I need to know what happened here specifically. Everything. The order of it, the timing, whether Grayson visited before or after the problem started. Before, Martha said immediately. He came to see Franklin about the land 6 weeks before the first fence went down. Franklin said no. 3 days later, the fence. Clara wrote it in her notebook. Did you recognize anyone? Anyone on your land that shouldn't have been there? There was a man, Martha said slowly. I didn't know him. He wasn't from Red Willow. He rode through twice, once before the first problem, once between the second and third. She paused. But there was also, this is the part I didn't tell Franklin because I couldn't prove it, and I didn't want to sound like I was looking for trouble, where there wasn't any. Tell me, Clara said. Cutler was here, Martha said. He came to see our hand Davis, who he knew from years back. Stayed for supper, very friendly. A week later, our grain supply was ruined. She looked at Clara. I don't know that it means anything. It means something, Clara said. She got back to the Callahan ranch by noon, with 2 more names, families Martha knew who had sold, and whose situations she had watched closely, the way women in small towns always watched things closely, and were rarely asked what they had seen. Ethan wasn't back yet. She was in the kitchen organizing her notes when Thomas came in from outside. He stopped when he saw her face. Something happened, he said. Nothing happened, she said. I'm thinking. You always look like that when you're thinking, he said. She looked up at him. Like what? Like you're doing 10 things at once, and most of them are invisible, he said. She almost smiled. Your father should be back by 2, she said. When he gets back, will you tell him I need to see him? Yes, ma'am, Thomas said. And then, because he was Thomas, is it about Grayson? She went still. What do you know about Grayson? I know Papa's been worried about him for months, Thomas said. He doesn't think I notice, but I do. A pause. And Cutler was meeting someone at the creek 2 nights ago. I saw him. Clara set down her pen. Thomas, she said very carefully. What exactly did you see? A man in a dark coat, Thomas said. He came on horseback, and he and Cutler talked for maybe 20 minutes, and then he left. He didn't come through the main road. He came up from the south. Could you describe him? I was too far, Thomas said. But the horse was a black Morgan with a white stocking on the left foreleg. He said it with the matter-of-fact precision of a boy who had grown up with horses and automatically cataloged them. "I'd know that horse." Clara looked at him. 12 years old and carrying information that could matter enormously, with no idea how much it might matter, and the poise to deliver it like a man. "Thank you," she said. "Is that useful?" he asked. "Very," she said. "Good," he said, and went back outside with the quiet certainty of a boy who had just done something that mattered. Ethan came back at 1:30. She told him everything at the kitchen table, while Emily kept Jacob occupied outside, and she watched him absorb it in the way she had come to recognize still and focused processing faster than he showed. "Morrison had the same sequence," he said when she finished. "Fence, then cattle, then the grain. He almost sold. His wife talked him out of it." He looked at his hands. He said he felt like a fool for not speaking sooner. He thought he was the only one. "They all thought they were the only one," Clara said. "That's the point. Grayson keeps them isolated. They don't compare notes because they're embarrassed, and they're scared, and they've been told that what's happening to them is bad luck." "It's not bad luck," Ethan said. "No," she said. "It's a system." She slid her notebook across the table to him. "And now we have enough pieces to show what the system looks like." He studied her notes. "This isn't enough for a court." "Not yet," she said. "But it's enough to call a gathering." He looked up. "A gathering. The ranchers," she said. "All of them. The ones who sold, the ones who almost sold, the ones who are in the middle of it right now and don't know it yet. You bring them together, somewhere neutral, and we lay it out. They won't all come," he said. "Some of them will," she said. "And the ones who come will talk to the ones who don't. That's how it works in a place like this." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You want to present this?" "I want us to present this," she said. He looked at her in that direct way he had started doing, the one that still felt slightly like being caught in a light she wasn't used to. "You know what they'll say," he said, "about a woman standing up at a ranchers' meeting." "I know exactly what they'll say," Clara said. "I also know I've got evidence they don't have, and connections they don't know about, and 3 weeks of observations they dismissed because they were too busy looking past me to notice I was looking right back." She met his eyes. "Let them say what they want. I've been doing this my whole life." The gathering was set for Saturday at the Morrison Ranch, because Morrison had the largest barn, and because his wife Ruth, once contacted, had turned out to be the kind of woman who could organize 20 ranching families in 4 days with the quiet efficiency of a general who happened to do it through church committees and neighborly visits. In the 3 days before Saturday, the second major twist arrived, and it arrived in the worst possible way. Cutler disappeared on Thursday morning. He was there at breakfast and gone by 9. His bunk cleared, his horse missing from the stable. One of the other hands said he had seen him riding south before dawn. Ethan came to find Clara immediately. She was already putting on her coat. "He's going to Grayson," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "If Grayson knows we've been gathering information, then we move the gathering to tomorrow instead of Saturday," she said. "Send Thomas on the fast horse to the Morrison Ranch now. Ruth will get the word out." "Clara, if Grayson comes before we're ready." "Then we'd better be ready by tomorrow," she said. She had never in her life been the kind of woman who panicked. She had been afraid plenty of times, afraid in the quiet, deep way that lived in your chest when the situation was genuinely dangerous and you could see the edges of it clearly. She was afraid now. But fear had never stopped her from thinking, and she needed to think. "Go," she said to Ethan. "Send Thomas, then come back here and help me organize these papers. We need everything in order before tomorrow." He went. She sat back down at the table and she looked at what she had. She had the sheet in Margaret Callahan's handwriting with the dates and the names and the initials. She had her own notebook with the sequences documented across 4 ranches. She had Martha Parker's testimony and Ethan's account of what Morrison had told him. She had Thomas's description of the man on the black Morgan horse with the white stocking. It was not nothing, but it was not everything. What she did not have was a direct link, a piece of evidence that put Grayson's hand on the specific acts of sabotage. All of it was pattern. All of it was circumstantial. A good lawyer could dismantle it. She needed something harder. She thought about Cutler riding south before dawn. She thought about the envelope she had seen him carry to town, the one with the initials WG on the outside. She thought about where a man like Cutler would keep things he didn't want found. She went to the barn. She was not comfortable in the barn, not the way the men were. It was their space. She had always known it and respected it. But Cutler's bunk was in the small room off the back of the barn, where the hands slept when they didn't have separate quarters, and the room was empty now, and she went through it with the fast, systematic attention of a woman who had cleaned other people's rooms for 13 years and knew exactly where people hid the things they wanted hidden. It took her 11 minutes. The letters were under the floorboard beneath his cot in a tin box that had once held tobacco. There were 7 of them, all in the same hand, all signed with a G rather than a full name. She read them fast, and her hands were very steady. They were instructions. Specific, detailed, dated instructions for each act of sabotage across the Callahan Ranch, and at least 2 others she could identify from the descriptions. Cut the east fence on the 14th. Drive the calves south through the Morrison Creek crossing on the 21st. The grain stores in the Callahan barn 3rd week of August, when Callahan would be at the late market. She sat on the floor of Cutler's empty room with 7 letters in her hands, and she understood 2 things simultaneously. The first was that she had everything she needed. The second was that Grayson knew she had it, or would know soon, because Cutler had gone south. She stood up, put the letters in her coat pocket, and walked back to the house. Ethan was in the main room when she came in. He looked at her face. "What did you find?" he said. She laid the letters on the desk. He read them. She watched him read them. Watched the way his jaw tightened, and his breathing changed, and the particular stillness that settled over him, which was not the stillness of a man who was shutting down, but the stillness of a man who was gathering himself for what came next. "This is enough," he said. "Yes," she said. "We need the marshal." "Yes," she said. "And we need the gathering to happen tomorrow before Grayson can act on anything Cutler tells him." "He might come tonight," Ethan said. "He might," she said. They looked at each other. "The children," he said. "I know," she said. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him running the calculations, the same calculations she had already run. "Emily and Jacob can go to the Morrison Ranch tonight," he said. "Ruth will take them. Thomas stays," Thomas said. They both turned. Thomas was in the doorway. He had his father's jaw set in exactly his father's way. "I heard," he said before either of them could ask. "I'm not going to the Morrisons. This is my ranch too." Ethan looked at his son for a long moment. "You stay inside," he said. "Whatever happens, you don't come out." "Yes, sir," Thomas said. And then, with 12-year-old precision, "But if you need someone to ride for the marshal, I'm the fastest on the gray mare." Clara looked at Thomas. She thought about everything he had already done in the past 3 weeks without being asked, the things he had noticed, the things he had told her, the way he had been carrying the weight of this family since he was 9 years old, and hadn't known how to put it down. "If we need the marshal," she said to Ethan. "Thomas rides." Ethan looked at his son. Something moved across his face. Pride and grief and love all tangled up together in the way they got in a parent who was seeing their child become something. "Yes," he said. "Thomas rides." That night was the longest of Clara's 3 weeks at the ranch. She sat at the kitchen table after the children were in bed, with the letters in front of her, and her notebook open beside them, and she organized everything, every piece of evidence, every testimony, every date and name and sequence, into the clearest and most straightforward account she could build. She had done this kind of work before, for the merchant in St. Louis, and she had been good at it then. She was better at it now, because now it was not someone else's ledger she was protecting. Ethan came in at midnight. He had been outside checking the perimeter. He sat down across from her. "They're not coming tonight," he said. No, she agreed. He'll want to think. Grayson is careful. Cutler probably doesn't even have all the information. He knows we've been talking to the other ranchers, but he doesn't know about the letters. So we have until tomorrow. Until tomorrow, she said. He looked at the paper she had organized. He looked at the neat, clear columns and the careful handwriting and the logical structure that turned 3 weeks of invisible observation into something undeniable. You did all of this, he said. We did, she said. Clara. He stopped. He seemed to be deciding something about the words. I want to say something to you. She looked at him. When you stepped off that train, he said. He stopped again. The hat was not in his hands this time, but his hands were doing the same thing. His hands did when he had the hat, a restless, turning a working through something physical, because the emotional part of it had no other outlet. I treated you in a way that... Ethan, she said. Let me say it, he said. She waited. I treated you like you were a mistake, he said. Like you were something that had gone wrong, and I was wrong. He looked at her across the table. You are the reason my children are all right. You are the reason this ranch is going to be all right. You came here, and you worked, and you watched, and you cared about things I had stopped being able to care about, and I want you to know that I see it. All of it. Clara sat with those words. She had waited a long time for words like that. Not these specific words, not from this specific man. She had not let herself want that, because wanting things like that had always been the way to get hurt. But words that said, I see you. Words that said I was wrong about what I was looking at. Those words she had waited a long time for. I know you see it, she said. Her voice was steady because she was always steady, but there was something in it that hadn't been there before. That's enough for tonight. He nodded. He looked like a man who had more to say and had decided that tonight was not the night to say all of it. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. He got up to go. Ethan, she said. He turned. Whatever happens at the gathering, she said. Whatever they say, don't apologize for bringing me, don't qualify it, just let me speak. He looked at her for a moment. I would never apologize for you, he said. Not anymore. He went upstairs. Clara sat alone at the kitchen table in the quiet house. She thought about Victoria Hayes saying a woman like you doesn't last. She thought about the platform and the words he had said, and the particular specific loneliness of standing somewhere you hadn't been wanted and deciding to stay anyway. She thought about Margaret Callahan, hiding a sheet of paper in the back of a ledger, knowing something was wrong trying to leave a record. She thought about what she was going to say tomorrow in front of 20 ranching families who had never in their lives expected to hear it from a woman like her. She thought about all the ways she had been underestimated in her life, and how every single one of them had become in the end an advantage. She closed her notebook. She blew out the lamp. She went to bed. And tomorrow came. The Morrison barn held 23 people that morning, and not one of them had expected to be there. Ruth Morrison had moved fast and quietly, the way women in small towns always moved when something needed doing, without the men knowing quite how it got done. A word here, a note there, a quiet conversation. After Sunday services that somehow resulted in every ranching family within 20 miles showing up at the same place, at the same time, with the same unspoken understanding that something had shifted, and they needed to know what it was. They came in their wagons and on horseback, and some of them on foot. The ones who had already sold to Grayson came with the particular look of people who suspected they were about to learn they had been fooled. The ones still holding on came with the look of people who had been surviving on stubbornness alone and were running low on it. The ones in the middle, the ones Grayson was currently working on, came with the look of people trying very hard not to show how scared they were. Clara stood at the side of the barn with her notebook and her papers and the 7 letters from the tin box, and she watched them all come in, and she cataloged them the way she cataloged everything quickly, precisely without judgment, because judgment came after information, and she was still gathering. Ethan was at the front, talking with Morrison, who was a large, quiet man with a white beard and the steady eyes of someone who had been thinking about something for a long time, and had finally decided to stop thinking and start acting. Ruth Morrison moved through the crowd with coffee and a firmness of purpose that reminded Clara of a river accommodating everything in its path and still getting where it was going. Victoria Hayes was there too. Clara had not expected that. She should have, because Victoria Hayes was the kind of woman who was at everything that mattered in Red Willow, but she had been so focused on the logistics of what she needed to say that she had not thought through the complications of who would be there to hear it. Victoria was standing near the back with two other women whose names Clara had learned at church, and she was watching Clara with an expression that was pleasant and sharp, at the same time the expression of a person who was waiting for something to go wrong and was ready to make use of it when it did. Clara looked at her once. Then she looked away and went over her papers one more time. Ethan came and stood beside her. "Ready," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "Victoria's here," he said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Does that change anything?" "No," she said. He looked at her sidelong. "You're not even a little bit worried?" "I'm worried about plenty of things," she said. "Victoria Hayes isn't one of them." That she could tell from his expression was the answer that settled something for him. Morrison called the gathering to order at 9 o'clock with the straightforward authority of a man on his own property, and the barn went quiet with the particular quality of quiet that came when a group of people all had the same question and were waiting to find out if someone finally had an answer. "I'm going to let Ethan Callahan speak first," Morrison said, "and then I want everyone in this barn to listen to what comes after. Understood?" Some nods, some silence, a few people glancing at each other. Ethan stepped forward. He was not a natural speaker. He was the first to know it. He spoke the way he did everything plainly and without decoration. And what he said was exactly what had happened at the Callahan Ranch in the sequence it had happened. The fence, the calves, the grain, Grayson's visit, Cutler. He kept it short. He kept it factual. And when he was done, he said, "Clara has the rest of it. I want you all to hear her out." The shift in the room was immediate. Not hostile exactly, not all of it, but visible. She felt it, the way she always felt it in that deep, practiced place that had learned to recognize the temperature of a room changing. A few of the men straightened in a way that said they were preparing to be polite about their skepticism. One man near the front, a rancher named Briggs, whose spread was 2 miles east of Morrison's, crossed his arms. Clara walked to the front of the barn. She did not smile. She did not apologize for being there. She did not start with a softening statement or a humble opening that asked their permission to speak. She had spent 27 years doing that in one form or another, and she was done. She held up the 7 letters. "These were hidden under a floorboard in the Callahan bunkhouse," she said. "They are written instructions for specific acts of sabotage on the Callahan Ranch, signed by a man whose initial is G. I have matched the dates in these letters to the dates of the incidents that Ethan just described. They match exactly." Silence. She set the letters on the table Morrison had put up for her, and she opened her notebook. "Over the past 3 weeks I have spoken with the Parker family, the Morrison family, and 4 other families in this valley about the sequence of problems they experienced before Grayson made his offer to purchase their land." She did not look at her notes. She had memorized them. In every single case the sequence is identical. Fence first, livestock second, supply interference third. Then an offer from Grayson timed to arrive at the moment of maximum pressure when the family has been weakened enough to consider taking it. She paused. "This is not bad luck," she said. "This is a system." Briggs uncrossed his arms. He leaned forward. "Ma'am," he said not unkindly, "that's a serious accusation to make against a man like Grayson." "Yes," she said, "it is. Which is why I have documentation for every claim I'm making." "How do we know those letters are real?" said another man she didn't recognize. "Because 3 of the ranches named in those letters had the exact problems described in those letters on the exact dates written in those letters," she said. "And because those ranches sold to Grayson within 45 days of the last incident." She looked at the man directly. "I can name the ranches, the dates, and the incidents. Would you like me to?" He didn't answer. "The Morrison Ranch," she said anyway, "had their east fence cut on April 14th. Their cattle lost on April 21st. Their grain spoiled in the first week of May." She turned the notebook so the room could see her handwriting, the clean columns of dates. "The letter in my hand describes all three of those events, on those exact dates." Morrison, who had not spoken since calling the gathering to order, said from where he stood, "That's right." The room changed again. A different shift this time. "The Hendricks spread," Clara said. "March 18th fence cut, March 26th cattle, April 3rd supply interference." She looked up. "James Hendricks, are you here?" A man near the back wall stood up slowly. He was somewhere around 60, with the look of a man who had carried a private shame for months. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Does that match what happened on your property?" A long pause. "It matches," he said. "To the day." The room went very quiet. Clara let the quiet sit for exactly long enough. Then she said, "Walter Grayson came to this valley 14 months ago. He has purchased 7 properties. He has made offers on 11 more. He is not buying struggling land out of goodwill. He has a contract with the Northern Pacific Railway Company for a right-of-way easement that requires a specific corridor of land running through this valley. That corridor crosses every property he has purchased and every property he has approached." She paused. "The land he is buying for distressed prices is worth 3 to 4 times his purchase price the moment that railway contract is confirmed. He is manufacturing your distress to buy your futures cheap." That was the moment when the barn stopped being a gathering and became something else. The sound that came out of 23 people who had just understood they had been systematically robbed was not loud at first. It was the sound of air leaving a room, of breath caught and held. And then the voices started low at first and building, and Morrison had to call for quiet twice before he got it. "The railway contract," said a woman near the middle of the crowd. Clara recognized her as June Aldrich, whose husband had been one of the first to sell. "How do you know about the railway contract?" "Because I worked for a man in St. Louis who handled rail freight contracts," Clara said. "And because the Northern Pacific line extension through Montana has been in the public record of the territorial legislature since March of last year. Grayson filed an easement application in May. You can read it in Helena." She looked at June Aldrich. "Nobody told you because nobody expected you to look." June. Aldrich's face did something complicated. Grief and fury combined in the particular ratio of a person who had just discovered the true dimensions of a loss they had already been living with. "My husband sold at 30 cents on the dollar," she said. "I know," Clara said. "I'm sorry." "What can we do about it?" June said. "We already signed." And that was the question, the real question, the one underneath everything else, and Clara had been working on the answer to it for 2 days. "You signed under false pretenses," she said. "The sales were made possible by criminal acts of property destruction and fraud. A territorial court won't uphold contracts obtained through a coordinated criminal scheme. I have an attorney's name in Helena who has handled land fraud cases before. And I have a letter of introduction from Judge Harlan Webb, who is the circuit judge for this district." She let that land. "I wrote to Judge Webb 10 days ago. He wrote back 4 days ago. He wants to see the documentation." The silence that followed was the silence of people recalibrating what was possible. Briggs, who had been the first to push back, stood up. "How did you know to write to a judge 10 days ago?" he asked. He was not being combative this time. He was genuinely asking. "Because I've been watching Grayson's pattern since my 2nd week here," Clara said, "and because I knew that evidence without a path to justice was just a story. I needed both." Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down. He said to no one in particular. It was Victoria Hayes who moved first, and the direction she moved was not the one Clara had been prepared for. Victoria came forward from the back of the barn through the crowd which parted for her, the way it always parted for Victoria Hayes, and she stopped about 10 feet from Clara, and she looked at her with the expression of a woman who was doing something that cost her something and was paying it anyway. "I have documentation too," Victoria said. The room went absolutely still. Clara looked at her. "I received a visit from Grayson 8 months ago," Victoria said. "He was very pleasant. He told me the Hayes Ranch was a natural fit for his land portfolio, and he would be very interested in discussing terms when I was ready." She paused. 2 weeks later, my head ranch hand was offered twice his salary to leave my employ. One of my water rights was challenged through a county clerk I later discovered Grayson had a financial relationship with, and my lawyer in Helena received a letter suggesting that my ownership of the property following my husband's death had certain legal ambiguities that might be worth examining. She said all of this in her honey and iron voice with complete precision, the way a woman delivered testimony she had been holding for 8 months and had decided to stop holding. I did not sell, but I also did not speak, because I was not sure I would be believed. She looked at Clara when she said that last part. Clara looked back at her. "I believe you," Clara said. Something moved across Victoria Hayes's face. Something that cost her even more than the testimony had. "The water rights challenge was dismissed," Victoria said. "I kept the record of it, and the letter to my lawyer, he still has it. It has Grayson's letterhead." Clara heard Ethan's breath change from where he stood. She understood why. Grayson's letterhead on a direct act of intimidation was not circumstantial. That was concrete. "Mrs. Hayes," Clara said carefully, "would you be willing to add your documentation to what we're taking to Judge Webb?" Victoria looked at her. This was the moment Clara had not planned for, the one she couldn't have planned for, the moment when the woman who had spent 8 weeks trying to make her feel unwelcome and unwanted was standing in front of 23 people deciding whether to stand beside her. "Yes," Victoria said. "I would." Briggs stood back up. "I'll ride to Helena myself if someone will tell me who I'm asking for." "The attorney's name is Samuel Bright," Clara said. "His office is on 3rd Street near the courthouse." "I know Sam Bright," said Morrison, who had been quiet for a long time. "He's a good man. He won't be cheap." "He said he'd take it on contingency," Clara said. "If we win, his fee comes out of the awarded damages." Morrison looked at Clara with the expression of a man who had revised his opinion of something and was not too proud to show it. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I have to ask, you've been in Red Willow less than a month." "Yes, sir," she said. "And you've done all of this in less than a month?" "Yes, sir." "How?" Clara looked at him. She thought about how to answer that. She thought about 13 years of other people's houses and other people's problems. She thought about 13 years of being in the room and being invisible and using it. She thought about the particular kind of attention you developed when you had spent your whole life being underestimated. "I had a lot of time to watch," she said. "And nobody was watching me." Morrison looked at her for another moment. Then he said to the barn, "I think we have our answer. Let's talk about next steps." The gathering broke into working groups, Briggs and 2 other men planning the Helena trip, the Aldriches and the Hendrickses comparing dates and documentation, with Clara Ruth Morrison organizing a chain of communication so that every family would know what happened next within 24 hours. Ethan found Clara at the edge of the working group, her notebook open, writing down the last pieces of testimony from James Hendricks. He waited until Hendricks moved away. Then he said very quietly, "You knew about Victoria." She finished writing. "I suspected she had information," she said. "I didn't know what kind." "You didn't know she'd come forward?" "No," she admitted. "That surprised me." "You didn't show it," he said. "No," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "She apologized to me," he said. "After you and Morrison were talking. She pulled me aside and she apologized." He paused. "She said she had been unkind to you and she regretted it." Clara looked up. "She meant it," Ethan said. "I've known Victoria a long time. She doesn't say things she doesn't mean." "I know," Clara said. And she did. She had known from the moment Victoria came forward that it was costing her something real. The kind of cost you only paid when the thing you were paying for mattered. Clara, Ethan said. She looked at him. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything practical. She waited. I have been watching you for 4 weeks, he said. Not the way I should have been watching you, not at first. At first I was watching to see when you'd give up, when you'd realize what you'd walked into and decide it wasn't worth it. He paused. You never gave me that. Not once. No, she said. I've been watching you with my children, he said. I've watched Thomas talk to you the way he used to talk to Margaret before he stopped trusting that the people he loved were going to stay. I've watched Emily sing in the kitchen again. Do you know the last time I heard Emily sing? It was before her mother got sick. His voice stayed steady, but it cost him something. And Jacob calls me Ma, Clara said quietly. He started doing it last week, Ethan said. Did you notice? I noticed, she said. Did it? He stopped. Does it bother you? She looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. It doesn't bother me. He exhaled. A long, quiet exhale, the kind that had been waiting somewhere for a long time. I made a mistake on that platform, he said. I said something to you that He stopped again. I can't take it back. I know I can't take it back. But I want you to know that it was the worst thing I've said to anyone in my life, and I knew it was wrong before the words were even out. Clara looked at him. Then why did you say it? She asked. Because I was afraid, he said. Because you got off that train and I saw a woman who was going to... He seemed to be finding his way through something in the dark, feeling for the shape of it. I saw someone who was going to make me feel things I had decided not to feel anymore. And that scared me more than any of the rest of it. The barn was busy around them, voices and movement, and the organized, purposeful energy of people who had gone from hopeless to determined in the space of an hour. Nobody was looking at them. They were standing together at the edge of it all, which was, Clara thought, a very specific and not a small thing. Ethan, she said. I know you might not, he started. Ethan, she said again. He stopped. I came here to work, she said. I told you that on the first day, and I meant it. I'm not a woman who needs rescuing, and I'm not a woman who needs... She paused. Elaborate declarations. I'm a woman who needs someone to act right, to show up, to do what they said they'd do. I know, he said. You've been doing that, she said. For the last 2 weeks you've been doing that. He looked at her. Is that enough? It's a start, she said. And something in her voice had shifted. Something she had been holding very carefully and very still for 4 weeks had moved just slightly from the place where she kept things she didn't let herself want. He heard it. She could tell from the way he looked at her that he heard exactly what that shift meant, because Ethan Callahan was a man who heard the things underneath the words, even when he couldn't always say the words himself. The ranch, he said. I want you to know whatever the court decides. Whatever happens with Grayson, this ranch is yours as much as it's mine. You earned that. You earned it before I understood what earning it meant. You don't have to say that, she said. I know I don't have to, he said. That's why I'm saying it. They stood together for a moment, in the noise and movement of the barn, and Clara thought about the platform and the words and the suitcase in the dirt, and she thought about the kitchen on the first evening, and Jacob's untied shoes and Emily's careful hands, and she thought about Margaret Callahan hiding a piece of paper in the back of a ledger because she knew something was wrong and she wanted to leave a record. She thought, I found it, Margaret. I found it. Grayson is going to make a move, Clara said, before the letter reaches Helena, before the judge can respond. I know, Ethan said. We need to be ready, she said. Yes, he said, and then quietly, we. She looked at him. We, she said back. It was not a declaration. It was not a promise made in so many words, but it was the moment when the words stopped being about a legal case and a land fraud scheme, and started being about something else entirely, and they both heard it, and neither of them looked away. The gathering ended at noon. Briggs left for Helena by 1 o'clock, with a copy of every piece of documentation Clara had wrapped in oilcloth against the weather and tucked inside his saddlebag with careful hands. Clara rode back to the Callahan ranch beside Ethan in the afternoon light, with her notebook closed on her lap, and the valley spread out around them was the same valley it had always been, wide and golden, and in no particular hurry, but something about the way it looked had changed. Or maybe it was the way she was looking at it. Emily and Jacob came running from the house when the wagon pulled in. Jacob attached himself immediately to Clara's side with the absolute assurance of a child who knows where he belongs. And Emily stood back slightly and looked at her father and then at Clara with those careful seeing eyes. And Clara thought she saw something in them, not quite belief, not quite relief, but something moving in that direction. Something that had started as a question and was beginning to look like an answer. Thomas came out of the barn where he had been working. He looked at his father. "How'd it go?" he asked. Ethan looked at his son. "Ask Clara," he said. "She's the one who did it." Thomas looked at Clara. She thought about what to say. She thought about 12 years old and cutting hay alone and cooking beans because that was what there was, and waiting 4 hours on a porch and having the eyes of someone twice his age. "We did it together," she said. "Your information about the horse mattered. Don't forget that." Thomas's jaw, his father's jaw, the same hard set, learned and inherited, softened just slightly, in the way she had only seen it soften 2 or 3 times in 4 weeks. "Okay," he said. He went back into the barn. And that evening, for the first time since Clara had arrived at the Callahan ranch, Ethan came in from the barn before dark. He washed up. He sat down at the table before supper was on. He helped Jacob with the chair that always stuck. He looked at Emily when she came in with the bread, and he said, "Smells good." And Emily looked at him with those careful eyes and said, "Clara showed me how." And Ethan said, "I know. It shows." Emily sat down and said nothing, but the quietness she sat down with was a different quietness than the one she usually carried. Lighter, like something that had been held tight had loosened. Clara set the food on the table. She sat down, and the Callahan family had supper together in the kitchen that Clara had made warm at the table that Emily had helped set with Jacob, talking about the rabbit near the creek that he had officially decided to name Gerald and Thomas, correcting something Jacob said about rabbits in the level-headed way he corrected everything, and Ethan watching his children with an expression Clara had not seen on his face once in 4 weeks, an expression that looked like a man who had remembered what he was living for. She did not say anything. She ate her supper, and she listened, and she thought about everything that was coming. The letter to Helena Grayson's next move, the work that was still ahead, and she held all of it in the calm, steady place she had built inside herself over 27 years of learning to carry hard things. But for right now, in this moment, there was just the table and the food and the sound of a family finding its way back. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. Grayson moved on a Tuesday. Clara had known he would move on a Tuesday, not because she had any particular intelligence about his schedule, but because she had spent 4 weeks learning how men like Grayson operated, and men like Grayson always moved when they believed you were still organizing. When they thought the response was still forming. When they assumed the people they had underestimated were still figuring out what hit them. What he did not know was that Clara had stopped organizing on Saturday. By Tuesday, she was ready. She was in the kitchen at 6 in the morning when she heard the horses. Not one horse, several. She counted the sound of hooves the way she counted everything quickly and without fuss, and she got to 4 before she was already moving to the window. 4 men on horseback. Grayson's hired buggy behind them, and Grayson himself stepping down from it before it had fully stopped with the particular deliberate calm of a man who was accustomed to arriving at places and having the situation rearrange itself around him. Clara called up the stairs. "Ethan?" His boots hit the floor before she finished his name. She was at the front door when Grayson knocked. She opened it before the second knock. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, a recalculation quick and almost invisible. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "I was hoping to speak with Mr. Callahan." "I know," she said. "Come in." She stepped back. He came in, and behind him she heard his men staying on the porch, which was either a courtesy or a strategy, and she did not particularly care which. Ethan came down the stairs. He had dressed fast, but he was dressed, and he looked at Grayson with the kind of complete stillness that was far more dangerous than anger. "Grayson," he said. "Callahan." Grayson looked between them. He had the practiced ease of a man who had done this many times and believed he always knew how it ended. "I've come to make a final offer on the property. Given recent circumstances, I thought it was worth having a direct conversation." "Recent circumstances," Ethan said. "I understand there's been some confusion among the ranchers in the valley," Grayson said. "Some questions raised. I want to assure you that any concerns about my business practices are entirely unfounded, and I think a direct conversation between reasonable men could clear all of this up before it becomes—" He paused, choosing the word with visible care. "Complicated." "It's already complicated," Clara said. Grayson looked at her. The pleasantness in his face was intact, but it had gone thin at the edges, the way ice went thin before it broke. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I appreciate your involvement in the Callahan household, but this is a business matter between you and the territorial court," Clara said, "which has already received documentation of your activities in this valley, along with a letter from 7 ranching families. The testimony of Victoria Hayes regarding your interference with her water rights and legal representation, and 7 letters written in your agent's hand describing specific criminal acts of property destruction on the Callahan Ranch and at least 2 others." She paused. "Judge Webb has scheduled a hearing for the 14th. I expect you've already heard from your own lawyer." The thin edge of Grayson's pleasantness gave way. It was not a dramatic collapse. It was the very controlled adjustment of a man who was recalculating on the move, but Clara was watching for it, and she saw exactly where the calculation landed in his eyes, in the slight tightening of his jaw, in the way he looked at Ethan, and then back at her with something that was no longer pleasant and not yet anything else. "You've been busy," he said. "Yes," she said. "A woman in your position," he started. "Is done being spoken to about her position," Clara said. Her voice was completely level. "Your offer is refused. Your men can leave the porch. And if you come to this property again before the hearing, I will send word to the marshal, who is already aware of the situation and has been for 4 days." Grayson stood very still. Ethan had not moved from where he stood at the bottom of the stairs. He had not said a word since Grayson arrived. He did not need to. His silence was the kind of silence that took up all the space in a room, and Clara had learned to understand that about him, that the most dangerous version of Ethan Callahan was the absolutely quiet one. Grayson looked at Ethan. "You're going to let her?" "Yes," Ethan said. One word. Quiet as the floor. Grayson put on his hat. He looked at Clara one more time, and in that look she saw the full measure of what she was dealing with, a man who had operated for a long time in the comfortable assumption that people like her were not factors, that they were furniture, that the world sorted itself the way he expected it to sort itself because it always had. She held his gaze and did not blink. He left. She stood in the open doorway and watched his buggy leave the yard, and she waited until the sound of the horses had faded before she let herself take a full breath. Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs. "Do I need to ride for the marshal?" he asked. "Not today," Clara said. He came down the stairs anyway, and stood beside his father and looked out the door at the empty yard, and for a moment the 3 of them stood there together, the boy his father and the woman who had come on the afternoon train, and the morning was very still and very clear. "He'll try something else," Ethan said. "He'll try the court," Clara said. "That's where we want him." Ethan looked at her. "You want him in court?" "I want him where everything has to be true," she said. Yes, the hearing was on the 14th, which was 11 days away, and those 11 days were the longest and the most ordinary of Clara's time at the ranch, which she had not expected. She had expected continued threat, continued pressure, some final move from Grayson that would require one more thing from her. Instead, what the 11 days gave her was work, the steady, daily, unglamorous work of a household and a family, and a ranch coming back to itself. She fixed the rest of the fence boards. She finished organizing the supply system so that Henderson's deliveries came monthly and on terms that didn't hurt. She helped Emily begin a kitchen garden that would supplement the household through the fall. She taught Jacob his letters because it turned out Jacob had not yet been taught his letters and had very strong opinions about which ones were his favorites. And she watched Ethan. She watched him come in for supper every night. She watched him sit at the table and listen to his children actually listen the way he had not been listening for 3 years because grief had made the sound of them too loud and too close to something he couldn't survive. She watched him ruffle Jacob's hair without thinking about it, the automatic, easy affection of a father who had remembered he was one. She watched him stop outside Emily's door one evening and knock, and she didn't hear what was said, but she heard Emily's voice go from its usual careful quiet to something that sounded like actual talking, and she heard it go on for almost 20 minutes. She watched Thomas too. Thomas had begun doing something she had not noticed at first because it was so small and so consistent. He had begun waiting for her in the mornings. Not obviously, not in a way that announced itself. He would simply be in the kitchen when she came down doing something that needed doing without having been asked. And they would work in the same space in the early quiet before the others were up, and sometimes they talked, and sometimes they didn't, and both kinds of mornings felt like the same thing. One morning he said without looking up from what he was doing, "Mama used to be up before everyone else too." Clara kept working. "She would have liked you," he said, still not looking up. "She was like you. She didn't make a big thing out of things. She just did them." Clara stayed quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She left something for you, you know. All of you." He looked up then. "Yes. That paper I found," Clara said. She wrote down what she'd seen because she wanted someone to find it someday. She was protecting this ranch and this family even when she couldn't be here to do it herself. She paused. "That's the kind of woman your mother was." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She was." He went back to work, so did Clara. And the morning continued ordinary and irreplaceable. The hearing in Helena lasted 2 days. Briggs went. Morrison went. Ethan went with Victoria Hayes and her lawyer, and the full weight of 7 ranching families behind him. Clara stayed at the ranch with the children because someone had to, and because the evidence had already gone ahead of her and would do its work without her presence. She was in the kitchen on the second evening when she heard the wagon. She did not run outside. She finished what she was doing, dried her hands, and walked to the door. Ethan came in with mud on his boots and the look of a man who had traveled far and fast and was carrying something he needed to put down somewhere safe. He looked at her. She looked at him. "It's done," he said. She let out a breath. "Tell me." He sat down at the table. He told her everything. The testimony the letters read into the record, Victoria's documentation that had turned out to be the piece that made everything undeniable, Grayson's lawyer trying 3 different arguments and watching each one fail. He told her that the court had voided 4 of the 7 sales as fraudulently obtained, that the remaining 3 were under review, that Grayson had been remanded into custody pending criminal charges, and that the Territorial Attorney General had opened a separate investigation into the railway easement scheme. He told her that Judge Webb, at the close of the second day, had looked at the documentation and said on the record, "This case was built by one person who paid attention when everyone else had given up. This court owes that person a debt." Clara sat across from him at the table. "He said that?" she asked. "Those exact words," Ethan said. She looked at her hands. "You should have been there," he said. "Someone had to be here," she said. "I know." He paused. "Clara." She looked up. He reached across the table, and he put his hand over hers. Not with ceremony, not with announcement, just the simple directness of a man who had decided that the time for holding back was over. "I want to ask you something," he said. She waited, Not as a business arrangement, he said. Not as a housekeeper. Not as a partner in a legal situation. He looked at her steadily. As the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. As the person I want my children to know as their mother, if she'll have them. As... He stopped. His jaw was the hard set again, but this time she understood it differently than she had on the platform. It wasn't closed. It was the set of a man who was working through fear, because the thing on the other side of the fear was worth it. As the woman I love, he said, because I do, Clara. I don't know when it happened, and I'm not going to pretend I handled any of it well. But I do. Clara looked at him. She thought about the platform. She thought about the suitcase in the dirt. She thought about standing at the edge of a place that had never been built for her, deciding to walk in anyway. She thought about what it had cost her. And she thought about what she had found here in this house, at this table, with these people. Things she had told herself for 27 years that she did not need and could not have. She turned her hand over under his so that their palms met. Yes, she said. It was one word, but it was the one word that had never been easy for her to say, not because she doubted herself, but because she had spent so long protecting herself from the particular pain of wanting something she might not get. Yes was a door she had learned to keep closed. Yes was a risk she had learned to calculate very carefully. She said it without calculating. Ethan looked at her like she was something he did not have a word for yet, which was all right because Clara had always been something people didn't have words for until they knew her well enough. Yes, she said again, clearer, certain. The way she said everything she meant. He brought her hand up and pressed it against his jaw. Not a practiced gesture, not a romantic one from a storybook, but the gesture of a man holding on to something real, and she felt the roughness of his face under her palm, and she thought, this is what belonging feels like. Not the ending of something. The beginning. Thomas found out that evening because Jacob told him within approximately 45 seconds of being told himself, and Jacob told Emily, and by supper time, the entire Callahan household knew and had opinions. Jacob's opinion was that this was the best thing that had ever happened, and he had known it was going to happen since the first day, because he had decided Clara was his from the first day, and he had just been waiting for the adults to figure it out, which had taken a long time because adults were slow about important things. Emily's opinion was delivered not in words, but in the way she set the table that evening, carefully, precisely, with an extra small arrangement of wildflowers in the center that she had clearly gone out specifically to pick, which was the Emily version of a declaration. Thomas's opinion came in the form of a single sentence delivered while he and Clara were doing the morning work 2 days later. He said, "You're going to stay." "Yes," she said. He nodded. He picked up what he was carrying and went on with the work. And that was enough. That was for Thomas everything. The wedding was in October, which was 6 weeks after the hearing, and 4 months after Clara had stepped off the afternoon train with one worn suitcase and a simple blue dress. It was held at the Morrison Ranch because Ruth Morrison had offered, and because the Morrison barn was large enough for everyone who wanted to come, and everyone in Red Willow wanted to come, because a story like this one, a story about a woman who had arrived as nobody and left as the person who saved an entire valley, was the kind of story a town needed. The kind it would tell for a long time. Victoria Hayes was there. She sat in the front row on the left side, and when Clara walked in, she stood up and met her eyes, and what passed between them was not friendship exactly. It was something more specific than friendship. The particular understanding of two women who had been on opposite sides of something and had found their way to the same one. Clara wore the blue dress. She had repaired it and pressed it, and she wore it because it was the dress she had been wearing on the platform, and she was not a woman who forgot where she came from or what she had walked through to get here. Ethan was waiting at the front of the barn. He looked at her when she came in. He looked at her the way she had waited a long time to be looked at, not because of what she wasn't, not despite what she was, but with the full, clear attention of a man who had learned to see her and was grateful every day that he had. He did not have a speech. He was not a man of speeches. When she reached him, he said very quietly, "Just for her. I was wrong about you the moment I saw you." "Yes," she said. "You were. I've been right about you ever since. he said. She looked at him. She thought about all of it, the platform, the kitchen, the letters in the tin box, the barn full of ranching families who had listened to her, the hearing in Helena, the morning work with Thomas Jacob's relentless cheerful love, Emily's wildflowers on the table. Yes, she said, you have. They were married before noon. In the months that followed, the valley healed the way things healed when people decided to stop surviving and start living. The families whose land had been stolen pursued the court's remedies, and 3 of them got their properties back. The ones who couldn't get the land back got settlements that let them start over. The Northern Pacific easement scheme collapsed without Grayson to hold it together, and the land values in the valley came back to what they should have been all along. The Callahan Ranch grew. The fields that had been neglected came back under Ethan's hands, and Clara's organization, and Thomas's steady increasing competence. Emily turned 10 in November, and Clara made her a cake with dried apples from the cellar, and Emily ate 2 pieces and declared it the best she'd ever had, which was the highest compliment Emily gave anything. Jacob learned all his letters and immediately wrote a letter to the rabbit near the creek, which Clara helped him spell correctly. Thomas turned 13 in December. On his birthday, he came to Clara before breakfast. He said, I need to ask you something. She turned from the stove. Ask. Jacob calls you Ma, he said. Emily. He stopped. He looked at the floor and then back up at her, and in his eyes she saw something that 12 years of hard living had not quite managed to finish hardening over. Something still soft and young and careful. Can I? Clara looked at Thomas Callahan, who had been cooking beans 3 nights a week since he was 9, who had waited for her in the mornings, who had told her about the horse with the white stocking and handed her information that changed everything. Yes, she said. You can. He nodded. He swallowed. He picked up what he needed for the morning work and went to the barn. And Clara stood in the kitchen that she had made warm in the house that she had made into a home on the ranch that she had helped save, and she looked at her hands, the same hands she had looked at in the dark of that first night, wondering what she had walked into. And she understood something she had been moving toward since the moment she stepped off that train. She had not come to Red Willow to be wanted. She had come because she was willing to do the work when no one else was, and the wanting had come anyway. On the platform that July afternoon, a man had looked at her and said, You're not my mail-order bride, like it was the end of a sentence, like it was a door being closed. It was not the end. It was not a closed door. It was the first line of the only story that had ever mattered, the story of a woman who was told she did not belong, and walked in anyway, who was told she was not wanted, and stayed anyway, who was told she was not enough, and proved day by day and